So why did Lightyear bomb? Was its lackluster performance at the box office justified? As in, is it a bad movie and a major misstep from a powerhouse studio like Pixar who hardly ever misses? So what went wrong then? Is Pixar losing the plot, or did critics get it wrong? I want to look at this film from the perspective of the story structure, the theme, and the intended audience/cultural context. So first, was story structure the problem? Well, this will not be a deep dive into the story structure and beats of the story like I've done with other Pixar films, because Pixar's allegiance to following a blueprint and a beat sheet to the T is renowned. So it's like trying to blame Steph Curry, the best shooter in basketball maybe ever, to blame the form of his jump shot when his team, the Warriors, lose a single game. But frankly, that's why this film's flop is newsworthy, and why we're critiquing it here, because they crank out hit after hit and it's a shock when they don't. So this is an attempt to run an autopsy on the failure and find where things fell apart, which unlike most films is usually within the pacing and the plot structure. So then, if that's not it, are there thematic shortcomings? I'd say the theme and philosophical dilemma is not lacking, although it might be a bit more trite than innovative. Unlike Turning Red's theme, Pixar's last film, it does fit the nostalgia action tropes that I think it was aiming for though, which is the hero who only knows how to bear the burden by himself, to accept his failure or achieve acclaim alone. So the dilemma here is how to accept help, give up control, rely, depend, and trust others to achieve a greater good. Stop trying to be the solo hero and find a community of others who will help you as much as you help them, and you will grow together, a true cooperative heroic arc. And again, it's a solid message, if not a little overly well-trodden. So if that's not the reason for the film's failure necessarily, what is it then? Is it that they abandoned their own canon and audience loyalty by replacing Tim Allen and retconning the origin story? Well, this is probably the most fair critique of the film, as in many ways we already had in the 2D animated Buzz Lightyear of Star Command an origin story, which this is not that. And it's rather beloved by those who grew up watching it. I was far too old at the time to be into it, but I just watched an episode recently and it is great. But it is also noteworthy because Buzz is played by Patrick Warburton, who is an amazing actor and voice actor. But people weren't mad that it wasn't Tim Allen at the time. But again, this was the year 2000, before Twitter and when online trolls didn't hive mind themselves into a frenzy over silly things or valid things. Now, let me also attempt to not step on a landmine, but tackle something worth mentioning, and I'll come back to this part. But speaking of an opinionated online activity, a lot of people want to attribute Lightyear's failure because Pixar was trying to push their politics down America's tiny throats or something. So let me just say that there is this fallacy of woke equals broke. Because, well, just because it rhymes, it doesn't make it true. And I say that as an independent political thinker who thinks representation is important, because I was a school teacher for kids who didn't have a lot of representation in media. So every character that did look like them meant the world to them. But I'm not here to out-logic small-mindedness, but obviously there was political news attributed to this film that probably didn't help sales. But it was such a minor inclusion of representation that it's not even worth debating bigotry at the box office or with critics, because if woke really equals broke, then why was Brokeback Mountain such a success? Again, I'm happy representation is always expanding, but I too think corporate wokeism is a stupid gimmick just attempting to curry favor of some marginalized person's wallet. But I don't think that was Pixar's intention, nor do I think it helped their ticket sales. I just don't think it was the main culprit. So a question I want to put out there then is what do film critics do? In the past, it was pretty clear. They attempted some semblance of objectivity, but because they were so well versed in cinema and film criticism that we trusted their opinion, whether or not they always got it right, as it is still somewhat of a subjective science. Now, who were they? Well, they were a small handful of white dudes in print or on TV, not online or on YouTube, so like Siskel, Ebert, and the like. But they weren't attempting to make news themselves or get a jump on everyone else's review, as is done now, or necessarily sway public opinion. They just gave us theirs. Whereas today, it's important for a film to get a few good reviews right out of the gate, because I believe critical thinking is at an all-time low and bandwagoneering at an all-time high, in the space of film criticism at least. And a film can succeed or flop depending on the whims of the many and not necessarily the strength of the story. Democratization is always a good thing, but it can have mixed results at first when it comes to, say, art criticism. What's seen as a flop in one generation may become a cult classic in another. See my Willy Wonka film breakdown for an example. So did critics who overwhelmingly started the brushfire of negative press around this film get it right, or just get it in concert? Now here is where we can begin some critical thinking by stating maybe two things can be simultaneously true or untrue. So maybe in some nuanced error within the studio, Pixar took a rare misstep. And within the critiques, reviews not being objective enough to see the film for what it was outside of the context. And maybe over time, this film will be viewed as another Pixar classic, and critics will have forgotten that they even steamrolled this flick. Or this film will be brushed off to the dustbin of history like Cars 2 or Good Dinosaur. Now, I recently and finally got around to watching Spider-Man No Way Home and was super hyped to do so since it was heralded almost unanimously as a great film, just shy of a masterpiece by critics. And you know what? I think being as objective as I can, it was just okay. Very uneven and almost unwatchable first half before the three Spider-Men arrive on screen. Like, it was seriously bad and then pretty damn good. The chemistry between all the Peter Parkers was fantastic and had some nice depth to it. But the general plot structure and how the stakes were set up was profoundly bad. But all the critics loved it and reviews positively steamrolled in. So it was good, thought the masses. Well then, did the other opposing reviewers just keep quiet? Or did their nostalgia bone get tickled and blind them? Or did they just defer their reviews to others to appease the collective group thought on the matter, afraid to step out of the crowd and oppose the tide? So the big reviews come in, gets the jump on the headlines, and maybe it's just a de facto bias that skews other reviewers, even just slightly, and then it catches ad infinitum and then what goes into a review? Does context matter? If you watched Lightyear outside of the current zeitgeist, would it look and land differently? I've also tried to watch season 3 and 4 of Stranger Things, which I find pretty bad. And I keep trying to go back to it because everybody seems so hype about it. And I did enjoy the first 2 seasons, but there's definitely some nostalgia being tickled here. But that's for another video. So the question is, can character investment over time help or hurt a franchise? For Stranger Things, I think it helps. For Buzz, this go around, it hurt. Why? Well, because who is Buzz Lightyear to the masses? Who is his target audience? My son, who's 3.5, loves Buzz. These are his toys, not mine. And he loves all the Toy Story films, and we bought into all the new merchandising, and I'm totally into it. But I'm not rushing to show him this film. Whereas I watched it as a 43-year-old man with my dad, a 73-year-old man, and we dug it. So I think here lies your answer, your real cause of death on this postmortem. This film is not for Buzz's main base, young kids. This film is more for, well, me and my dad, a fan base that loves sci-fi films, grew up watching Toy Story to some extent, and now has kids of their own, but still reluctant to show this film to their kids as it might be over their head. It's a tough niche to nail. However, there was another major issue, and that was with the theatrical release of this film. The last 3 Pixar films have been direct to Disney+, which Onward is one of my favorites of the recent Pixar films, got lost in the shuffle as it was set to release as a theater shut down at the very beginning of the pandemic. So who knows if that would have flopped as well. But it's for me already a classic. But let's get back to Buzz again. So if we could get out of the social, political, and cultural, the culture of Toy Story that is, context, and away from how it may have been poorly distributed and marketed, is the film good? Is the film structured beat by beat and paced well? I think that's an easy yes. Did we care about our heroes, and did their journey deliver meaningful discoveries that better allow them to overcome their shortcomings and their wounds, and in a way that we can also relate to? In spite of the fact that we are not animated characters or fictional characters living within an already fictional universe where toys have humanity, and yeah, it's a bit confusing, but the question remains, and I think clearly to all those, yes. Lightyear is a popcorn sci-fi action comedy with heart and high stakes that is purely beautiful in production design and execution, and an absolute technological stunner. However, it is a more mature Pixar film in aesthetic and plot. But for me, it fits into the Toy Story canon enough that if my son doesn't get the film now, he will in like a year or 2, or 40 like me. Is it perfect? No, of course not. But is its critical failure worthy of being a commercial flop? Well, no as well, as it was still a better film than Jurassic Park. And do critics always get it right? No, because art is subjective to an extent, but usually the normative range of the collective usually get it right. So can the collective then also get it wrong? Well, yes, again, this is why some flops turn into cult classics. So will this Buzz Lightyear be one of those films? Well, I think only time will tell. Okay, thanks a lot.